you come into this type of work and think you're going to leave your job at the door, when you leave. It's not quite that, it's really not. The young people that we work with, they are more attuned to us than we are with each other. They are so attuned. And if you've had a difficult time at home and you come into work and, yeah, I'm all right, they know you're not all right. So the boys, the lads that we work with, they are also expected to engage in a lot of group work as well. And the purpose of that is to help them with their relationships. The key word is relationships, so they're able to learn to kind of function as a group and manage their relationships with each other. And it's far more powerful in a group if they are supporting each other whilst challenging each other at the same time. The most interesting part, I would say, of being in a therapeutic community. So that space we have for the adults, and we have it for the young people. And I can tell you, the young people are better than the adults. Sometimes I come from there and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like they are just amazing young people. Like, to be able to share that stuff or to be able to help each other. And so, when they come for interview, they're interviewed by young people as well. And then we'll ask the young people, what did they think about, that person that came in? Did you think they'd be a good fit for us? Would you like them to be coming in and looking after you here? We've had young men, more recently, that have come from different environments come in, and the risk has changed quite quickly because there's a lot of routine, structure and safety around them. So the risks have eliminated, with a lot of those things. We work with some of the most resilient young men you just wouldn't believe. They're just, amazing young men, really, to have been through what they've been through. And they're with us and they're functioning and they're able to smile and they're able to go on activities and they're able to start to build them connections. It's a real privilege to be able to work with the young men that we do, absolutely, to be part of their lives and they, part of mine as well. Not all residential, care is right for every young person. We hear, it's not, but it's also right for a lot of young people. It really is, isn't it? We're not here to do something to young people. They're not going to change by us just coming in and intervening. We've got to be on that journey with them, and we've got to be able to feel a bit of what they're feeling. We need to be on that with them. Otherwise, the impact won't be as great. But there's a reason, isn't there, why I'm in this type of work, and I'm still trying to figure that out, sometimes.
I think I am too. Hello and welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pearce, and joining me for this episode is a guest who regularly challenges established views about boys and young men who commit harmful sexual behaviour. Before I introduce my guest, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands I come to you from, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the continuing connection the living Kaurna people feel to land, waters, culture and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. My guest this episode is Marie Clutton. Marie brings over 25 years of experience in therapeutic childcare and residential care management. She has been a part of Amberleigh Care for 2 decades and possesses extensive expertise in leading within a therapeutic community. Amberleigh Care operates 2 accredited therapeutic communities for young people who have engaged in harmful sexual behaviour, and Marie oversees all therapeutic community processes across the organisation. I do hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. So welcome, Marie, to the Secure Start podcast. I'm really pleased to have you as a guest.
I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, why don't we just start, if you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the organisation that you work for, and perhaps even how you came to be working there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start at the beginning. So when I left school, I didn't know what I wanted to kind of pursue with my career. I was very interested in art and design,
Mm,
interested in working with children. What I wanted to do anyway. I took the kind of creative route, art and design. Went down that in college for a couple of years, fine art, photography, different things. Really enjoyed it. After that, I thought, oh, gosh, am I really going to have a career in this? Is this something I want to do? I
mm,
thought, I know I'll do something with children. I'll learn about children. I'll go and something I'm interested in. Creative ways of kind of mixing that in. Went to college for a further 2 years to learn about childcare, just general
mm,
childcare. Really, really enjoyed that. Really, got stuck into that. Did really well, with my training with that. Worked with different ages, with children in nurseries, but older in schools. I thought, oh, yeah, this is really my thing, working with young people. I could be creative. It was, yeah, I really enjoyed it. So when I'd finished college, I I was thinking, is that right? Not right, but yeah, I enjoyed working in a nursery. But I thought, I've got a bit of a flavour of maybe going to travel a little bit.
mm,
Maybe I could work with children in another country. So I went away for 2 seasons in Spain to work with
mm,
families and children, doing lots of fun things, because I was younger. Really, really enjoyed that. Made lots of relationships with other people from different cultures, different backgrounds. Really loved that, really, really loved it. And I came home after the second season,
mm,
and I met my husband. I was 20 years old.
mm,
So I met him. I didn't go back then. I didn't go back
mm,
abroad to work. Best decision ever, obviously. So we got together at the age of, I was 20. And I thought, I still want to carry on working with children. What is it I want to do? And then I remembered someone coming into college, and I was there talking about she was working in residential care. She'd done the
mm,
same college course, and she was working for a company at the time. It was called Leaps and Bangs, quite near to where I live, residential childcare. And I thought, that sounds quite interesting. I remember her talking about that. So I, contacted them and applied for a position there.
mm,
Um, I wasn't quite sure what this was about, but I thought sounds a bit more challenging than working with children in a nursery or a school.
mm,
So I got the position there, and I went to work in residential childcare. I was like 20 years old. The
mm,
children were younger, they were aged between like 5 and 12.
mm,
So there was a house of 5 children, mixed children in there between the ages of 5 and 12, not far, about half an hour from where I lived. Knew some of the people that worked there from college. Actually, they got jobs there too. And that was the start of my kind of career with young people. So the young
mm,
people I worked with, they displayed harmful sexual behaviour as well.
mm,
They were younger, but that was my opening to that. So I did loads of training with the organisation, really amazing training, with them.
mhm,
But still, and there was points, I was thinking, is this when you're younger? I think you think differently to when you're kind of older, and you
mm,
go with the flow, and you're kind of like, I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but I'm doing it, and it's okay. I made really good relationships, but the young people, where they suffered a lot of trauma, they're much
mm,
younger as well, and a lot of trauma, and we went through some really difficult points. I was there for 5 years actually, and
mm,
changed position up into a senior role. There was many points where I was thinking, I'll leave, because I wasn't sure
mm,
if it was what I wanted to do. I didn't always feel that happy. I wasn't sure. Um,
mm,
uh, the young people did display, and I know I'll talk about this as we go along, with the young people I work with now, but young people that have displayed harmful sexual behaviour, I, or maybe others, I'm guessing, might assume that you see that behaviour a lot clearer than what it is. Are the young people going to be exposing themselves? Are they going to be, and all these things, and I do hear that around me in other, people that aren't in this type of environment or work in that, their views are interesting and what they talk about, but it's not that, it is not that. And I quite quickly learned that they're children. They are children, they suffered really awful childhoods, they're kids, and that I began to love my work a bit more, really up and down, but I began to really connect with it a bit more, and see them as children, and be doing activities with them as I would be doing with children. It was, so you're not seeing them for their behaviour, you're seeing them as kids, and I've got so many good memories of working with those children, so many good memories. But we went through some really difficult times, with those young people. Gosh, they'd be much older now, but they were quite violent at points, so we were trained how to, keep them safe. But that, for me, when I was that age, I think I found that quite tricky and, it, quite difficult, because I wasn't sure how to manage myself around that. I wasn't sure. There was loads of support in that work. There was lots of spaces to talk about how you felt. There was spaces, but I wasn't sure how to navigate that. And I think those are the points where I was thinking, is this the job for me? And should I be doing this? And I did. I think, well, I did struggle at points, and in that job there was a young girl, she was only 7 at the time, and I was key worker to her. And a massive learning point for me, I think about it so much now. I was key worker to her for quite a long time, and I did build a really strong relationship with her. I remember like decorating her room, didn't get the decorators in, the maintenance people. I wanted to do it. So I remember using my creative sort of skills, painting her room. She was with me, she was really, really young. Made her room like so lovely in her favourite colours, and I wanted to do everything I could for that little girl, And when she left, she moved on to a foster family. I personally really struggled with how I managed myself after that. I really struggled. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know. I really struggled. I remember being off work for a little bit of time there because it was that loss, that loss. And I loved that little girl. I didn't quite know how to kind of manage that, but she went on to a foster family, and it was really successful for her and wonderful, for her. But I personally, I couldn't. I struggled with that, and I didn't perhaps know how to ask for the help for that, and I didn't know, maybe those spaces I was offered wasn't right for me at that time. I didn't know. It felt really, unusual to me. I was experiencing new things I'd never felt before. It was a real learning experience for me. That was, that connection and the loss, and so I think back at that a lot now. So then I continued working there, and then after that I moved on. So this was after like 5 years, and I'd actually applied for the job at Amberleigh Care. There was a position going there for deputy care manager. I thought, that'll be a step up, and there were young males there between 11 and 18. And I thought, yeah, that'll be a challenge, because they're older than the young people I've worked with, a high position. Is that what I want to do? And then I went for a position actually in a nursery as it was like a classroom sort of teacher assistant, in this nursery, really new nursery, really lovely place. And I was offered these 2 jobs. And I was like, oh my goodness, which one, do I take, and it really wasn't till that morning that I was meant to start the job in the nursery, and the job, here at Amberleigh Care. It wasn't till the morning I decided which one to take. I woke up in that morning, I was like, goodness, and I remember an old boss of mine in that residential care, I remember messaging her, close to the time and saying, "Oh, look, I don't know. What do you think I should do?" And she sort of said, well, your skills and your experience is with, I think they're with, the young people that have displayed harmful behaviour, they've suffered trauma, but completely your choice. But I think that's where you kind of skilled at, and that rung in my head a bit, maybe that's something I should be kind of going towards, So I woke up that morning and I rang the nursery and said, "Thank you for this lovely opportunity, but I'm not going to take the position. So I'm letting you know so late, and felt really bad about that." But so then that's when I went to start my career at Amberleigh Care, and here I am over 20 years later, and I'll obviously go into that with you about my life, my life at Amberleigh Care. But I feel really very fortunate, that I've had the upbringing that I've had. I've had a lot of love around me. I've had a really great, childhood. Really, I honestly have, and I feel so grateful and thankful for that. And I think that has helped me, in my career in lots of ways. And that's never to say that people that have not had that upbringing can't do this job well, and they can't be amazing in this job. I've absolutely seen that. I've seen young people, go through the care system and they're in amazing roles and better in lots of ways because they've lived experience that, just phenomenal. But I think for me, I feel so grateful for that, and I think that helps me kind of, it sort of kind of scaffolds me, and it's around me. I'm able to kind of do this all right. It hasn't always been easy. It's not always easy even now. Of course not. You work with different people, you have different relationships. It's very tricky, but I think it's kind of given me a very good base to help me learn about myself. And that's where it's kind of begun. So I started my, role at Amberleigh Care, over 20 years ago. I went into it, I'd say a little bit naive again, going into, this role. I was 27, at the time. And that year I got married, I had a child not long after that. I've got 3 children now. So I've had, a lot of my life, at Amberleigh Care, and a lot of things personally for me have,
a lot of
happened.
milestones.
Yeah, huge milestones. So I honestly consider, my life at Amberleigh, and who's to say, you never know with future and things, do you? But it really has been a huge part of my life, there.
Yes.
And again, fortunate that I can share that, with others, and my experiences. And like I say, it's not always wonderful. Of course, it's not in this, environments, but that's okay. It's important to be able to share that and talk about how you've, managed that, isn't it? And the difficulties and the positives.
So tell us a little bit about Amberleigh Care itself for those who don't know about it as an organisation.
So Amberleigh Care is an organisation. We have 2 communities now, accredited therapeutic communities that care for young males between the ages of 11 and 18 that have suffered really difficult childhoods and upbringings. They have displayed harmful sexual behaviour. That's one of the reasons, they're with us, and we specialise, to be able to help them with that. But, it doesn't come standalone that. There's a lot of other difficulties they come with and needs, that we're able to help them with. So we don't solely focus on that whilst they're with us. Very individual, So I'll tell you a little bit more about each site. So we've got a site in Wales, in Welshpool, that's mid Wales. And we can have up to 19 young boys, young men there. We've currently got 16. And then our other site opened some years later. Originally, it was the Welsh Pool, one in Wales, that I went to work in to start off with. And then we've got a community in England. So this is about 50 minutes, an hour away. So that's over the border. That functions exactly the same as a therapeutic community. We can have up to 14 young men there. Well, currently we've got 12 young men there. So we've got a referral process for our young men that's very robust, very, very robust. And the person that manages that used to work in the care team to kind of work their way through, so they know both communities really well. The kind of young person, that would be suitable and matched to our communities. So the ratio of staff is 1 staff to 2 young people. We've got a range of staff that work across both communities, ages, men, women, young people, older people, different, backgrounds themselves, very different, which is wonderful that we're able to have that. Really, it's really important for our young men that they have those different relationships, very different. Some have got experience from care, working in care, some haven't, very, very different. And that's what we want. We want a range of very different, others to work with, and so we can build together different relationships. We've got a very strong management team that have been with the organisation years now, a very good core of team, we all know each other really well. So it's not a split. We work across both sites, that a lot of the management team do. The directors, there's 3 directors, finance, managing director, and operations director, and they work really closely together, and they're really, really supportive. They know us all really well, and as far as I'm concerned, run the organisation, amazingly. They do, just brilliant. That's changed over years. It was run differently at the start. There was a family that did run it at the start, and we had, when I first joined, there was only a couple of young men there at the time, because we just opened there. And of all the young people that have lived with us, there's only one young man I've never known, because he joined. I joined about 6 months after the organisation opened, and he joined and left during that time. Yeah, it is really, isn't it? I never. It's hard to kind of think about, but every young man that's like joined, I'm very lucky to have known and built relationships with all them young men.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The way you describe your life and your experience at Amberleigh Care, I just had this impression that it is very much integrated in your life as a whole. So your life, I guess, with your family and your life at work is all nicely integrated together. That's the impression that I get.
That's right. It is. And I think for anyone that comes into this type of work, and I've met people, over the years that have, of course, we're all different, all very different, that come in and different experiences. And I think it's been a real advantage for me, I guess, being in this line of work from a young age, I guess, in lots of ways. But I think if you come into this type of work and think you're going to leave your job at the door, when you leave, it's not quite that, it's really not. And I think, and maybe some people do that, and they're able to, and that's right for them. But I believe, to be, more impactful in the community for the adults, the people you're working with, and the young people you're working with. And I'm not saying you go home from work and that's all you think about, of course not. But I think now I've really settled with and accepted the fact that really is part of my life, and I love that, because that's part of me, isn't it? It is, and it's.
I think it's often an artificial distinction, your work life and your home life, your family life, and I remember when I was first training to be a clinical psychologist, there was, you were meant to maintain a professional distance that would facilitate objectivity. But my first role as clinical psychologist was in child protection, and it was very clearly apparent to me from very early on that um, having the full experience, being open to the full experience of the people that I was working with, including the staff, the parents, and particularly the children,
Mm.
made me a better practitioner. There's no doubt about that. And I do recall going for a job interview in another place one time and being asked about how I keep that that professional distance, that objectivity. And I said, well, I don't, because it's my own experience of the relationship. It's my own experience of the work that makes me a more, I think, sensitive and effective practitioner.
100%.
Mm.
Definitely, and I'm not, of course, we are professional when we need to be. And I'm not saying,
Mm.
It's not like don't go home talking about everything that's happened in it. It's not about that, but it's what you kind of hold inside you, isn't it? And what, and
Mm.
that goes both ways, from home to work as well. I don't go
Yes.
into work necessarily, I never go in talking about my personal life with young people.
Mm.
I don't purposely go to it and think, right, I'm not talking about anything today. It's not that, it's not that. It's who you are, and it's so important to be authentic, isn't it, in the work? And I take
Mm.
part of me into there, and then back home it's like vice versa. And I think sometimes people get that can feel quite confusing for maybe people that are coming into the work, because we're saying you be professional, don't discuss, you don't need to be discussing the ins and outs of your personal life with the young people. However, we want you to be real and authentic and really natural with them. Of
Mm.
course we do, but it's having that balance, isn't it? And knowing, and that does come with experience. Of course it does. It's not
Mm.
something straight away, I think.
I think it was. I'm pretty sure she'd not be happy with me for being not 100% sure, but I'm 99% sure it was Lynn Payton, who a friend of mine who is in Northern Ireland. She talked about work-life balance being um, I can't remember the word she used, but it's not really what we're striving for. It's work-life integration that we're
Yes.
and I think
Yeah.
it's interesting because while you were talking and reflecting on what I said, um, integration is kind of like the key word here, and in actual fact, integration is a central pillar of the therapeutic work that we do with children and young people who've experienced um, abuse and neglect. And
Yeah.
so this idea that we should have we should maintain a degree of non-integration or disintegration I think between home and work seems anomalous to the therapeutic task, I guess, that we of integration of creating wholeness, facilitating wholeness. Mm.
Absolutely. And I think, for us, because we're a therapeutic community, there are specific spaces for the adults that work with the young people, to help them with that. So,
Mm.
and I'm saying here, at work and home, and we mix them up, of course, but we don't want, we're very careful. We don't want, our people we work with to be going home feeling overwhelmed. That's really natural
Mm.
as well, isn't it? Overwhelmed, and it's difficult work. It's so difficult, isn't it? The work
Mm.
and what you're full of, when you leave sometimes, and it's not easy. So we don't. It's not that we want the staff to be going home carrying that and holding it, and it's spilling
Mm.
into their lives and that coming into work. Because if that wasn't contained, that would happen.
Mm.
That
Mm.
absolutely would happen. So, for us, there's specific designated, spaces, safe spaces that we have for our staff to help them with that, and that's what's very different about therapeutic communities. That's what's very, very different, about working, in other residential care settings, so we provide spaces such as, we call it group supervision. So one of the therapists, and it's normally the clinical lead, that'll facilitate a space with all the staff that work with the young people to talk about the impact of the young people on them. So it's really important that they talk about what's coming up for them and what's that triggering in them, and that space is so important. Then we have another space called staff dynamics. That's something I facilitate. So that space is for the group to explore them as a group, the impact, their relationships with each other. So again, that's a specific space. So they've got, points every week, every month. We've got timetable points where they can explore that. So that helps them contain the work with the young people and themselves outside of, the work environment as well.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting. You don't want people to take the work home, but
No.
as such, but people, I guess there's recognition in what you're saying that people bring to work what they bring to work. They bring home to work, and they take work home. And I think unless we acknowledge that, then we don't necessarily see a role for containing spaces as you. The thing is that we bring ourselves in this work. That's what's really coming through, and why I was so keen to speak to you. That it's so clear that you're who you are at work is who you are as a person. Yeah, there is no there's no separate entities as such. There is one whole. There's one integrated person, and we sometimes in the work need to contain, for staff, we need to contain what's happening in their personal lives as well. At work, and obviously the other way as well.
And that's the reality of it, isn't it? And and that's a huge key part of our role. I feel so strongly about that. We're not different people when we go home. And I've heard so many people in my years, of this work. Yeah, I drive past that tree on the way home, and I leave everything behind. And I'm like, really? That really, do you do that? And, maybe that's the idea of that's all right, but do you really do that? Because you're some person, if you can do that, you can just leave all your feelings behind that tree as you drive past it, and like change who you are when you go home. And or somebody will say, well,
Yes.
I'm not like this at work, or I'm not like this, at home. And I'm thinking, well, what, And you know what? Above all this, for the young people that we work with, they are more attuned to us than we are with each other. They are so attuned. And if you've had a difficult time at home and you come into work and, yeah, I'm all right, they know you're not all right. They're not daft, they pick up on how you're feeling before anyone can. So why pretend? And I'm not saying share that stuff with the young people we work with, because they've got their own stuff going on. But it's really important that we recognise it and are able to manage it with support with our relationships. And so we can say to that young person, yeah, I'm tired. I am tired today. I've had a tricky night, but I'm all right. And I'm here for you today, and I'm focusing on you today. That's me. But it's okay not to pretend.
I I think you've got me thinking a bit more deeply about this, in that there's layers of sharing, in a sense. In this, of course we don't tell the story of our home life,
No.
nor do we tell the story of our work life at home. But it seems bizarre to me to make a distinction between who we are at home and who we are at work, in the sense that, as you rightly point out, our experience, we carry that experience of home into the work, and vice versa, and the kids pick
Yeah.
up on it. And at home, I'm sure the kids that we work with are particularly tuned into other people's presentations, but you know, our families also tune
Yeah,
in and pick up that stuff too. So there's
yeah.
unconscious communication all the time, and I think um, so. We've got talking quite a lot about the idea of integration and being a whole
Yeah.
person, and I think it's an interesting conversation because we use so much of ourselves as a person in the work that we do, and if we were fake about it, if we were trying to be something else, the kids pick up on it pretty
I know,
easily.
I
Mm,
always have this open conversation with our young men all the time, do you think if someone's like being real? And they're spot
mm,
on every time. Do you know what I mean? They know who's like being genuine with them and who's not, and they
mm,
form them connections, with those that are being real. They do
mm,
every time, every single time they do. So it's
yeah,
so important, isn't it? It's
yeah.
you know,
Do you started to talk a little bit about how a therapeutic community is different from
yeah.
um, other residential childcare um, settings. I wonder if you might just
Of
expand
course.
upon that a little bit in terms of how would you describe a therapeutic community as such?
Okay. So, like when I came into this work, we went accredited therapeutic community at Amberleigh Care. Initially it took some years to kind of build that in. But I guess the culture began. Kind of. We wanted that culture. And again, it was run by different people at that point. But I've been through it. Been through it with them, with the new. So um, part of that, which is lovely. But I
Mm,
think we've got them frameworks in our communities. When young people join us, they're in assessment periods. We've got risk assessments, there's policies, procedures. There's a lot of things that might be the same in other residential childcare. And I think they would be. A lot of things. We've
mm,
got a model of work, the Good Lives model, which is great. And I know other organisations might use that or different ones. Our young people have therapy with therapists, but the real difference, with the therapeutic community is that we're expected to engage ourselves. We're not coming in to do something to the young people, and it's really difficult to uh, explain that, I guess, when someone comes to join. Look up, people look on a website and think it's not the same till you feel it. So we are members with the Royal College of Psychiatry in London.
mm-hmm,
So it's a membership, and the purpose is that it's a quality improvement program. So we want to improve our service as a therapeutic community. So
mm,
there's a number of standards that we need to meet to be members. But because we're accredited, we have to meet a certain criteria and a certain percentage, and that is the key part of my role, to ensure that both of
mm,
our communities are doing that. So within that, that's about containment and having them spaces for the adults and the young people. So
mm,
the boys, the lads that we work with, they are also expected to engage in a lot of group work as well. Um, and the purpose of that is to help them with their relationships. The key word is relationships. So they're
mm,
able to learn to kind of function as a group and manage their relationships with each other. And it's far more powerful in a group if they are supporting each other whilst challenging each other at the same time, rather than the adults in there. So we have
mm,
meetings, community meetings, where there's not many staff in there, adults, in that group. And they're there as a big group. There's like 16 boys in that group, which we hold twice a week, and they will talk about them as a group, what difficulties they're coming up with, what they're not happy about another young person, might be breaking a
mm,
rule in the community, or there's lots of things. Someone's, they don't agree with the media rule, or if someone's struggled with their behaviour and something's happened, instead of, what might happen in other, residential homes is they have a sanction or a consequence for that behaviour put on them by the adults. Our young people have a big say in that, and they talk about it as a group. What do we think is going to help them not do that bit, not do that again? Or what do we think is the function of that behaviour? And then it opens up for other young men, like, oh yeah, that's happened to me, in the past. And that's, so they start to explore as a group, themselves. And every meeting is very different. Sometimes it's surface level things, sometimes it's what's going on at that point in time in that group. Other times a young man might mention something, I'm really struggling at the moment because I've had a family visit at the weekend and I've not seen my parent for a couple of years, and I'm really struggling with that feeling, and then another young man will say, yeah, I know that feels, actually, because that's happened to me too. And then they'll go deeper into things, so it really is a space for them to explore, and they help each other in that space. We're there to help them also, but they're there to support each other, we help them contain it, so they're not alone. They're not alone. They've got each other. And so that's the most interesting part, I would say, of being in a therapeutic community. So that space we have for the adults, and we have it for the young people. And I can tell you, the young people are better than the adults, in that space.
Maybe less guarded.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. A group of lads between the ages of like 12 and 18 talking together and supporting each other. Sometimes I come from there and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like, they are just amazing young people, like, to be able to share that stuff, or to be able to help each other and think a bit more. And we want them to feel a bit of empathy. We want them to feel each other a bit, and that's what it's about.
There's so many thoughts going through my mind. A well-worn quote from Richard Rawlinson of the Mulberry Bush, an elder of the Mulberry Bush, is that at the Mulberry Bush, the children come and they learn to live with themselves and with each other.
Yeah.
There's elements of the power of the group, and I asked you about what a therapeutic community is, but the way you describe it, particularly with the boys, puts me in mind of a village, and the reminder and Patrick Tomlinson, a well-known person in this space, reminds me that the initial conception of the conceptualization of the idea of it takes a village to raise a child was inclusive of the other young people in the village. The young people that helped to raise each other. And another thought I had about it was just that yes, Amberleigh Care specialises in accepting young men who have engaged in harmful sexual behaviours, but it's so much broader. It's the service that you're providing, and in fact, I can just imagine how the feeling of connection in those groups between those boys. And I had Alan Jenkins, a local psychologist here from Australia, who has a lot of expertise in the area of harmful sexual behaviours, and he and others who work in this space will say connection is the main factor in the harmful sexual behaviour. Yeah, so strengthening connections and strengthening capacity to live with others and make and maintain is part of the therapy, if you like, I would imagine.
100%, definitely. And they say a pure therapeutic community, really, they wouldn't, that need for one-to-one therapy, you could function a pure TC without that one-to-one therapy, because we're all, and in the TC world, we're all each other's therapists. That's what we say, that's what it is. We're all there to help and heal and support each other. That's what does it. That's what heals, our young men. Absolutely. It's the connection, the relationships, of course we've got all these other things going on. There's a lot of work going on around these young people, masses of work, reports, there's AIM assessments, there's intervention, there's a lot of work going on. But for me and my experience, if we haven't got, what I'm talking about now, is there's no real, work going on, really. It's the key, to the work with the young men. 100%. I just couldn't say it anymore. It is.
No. It puts me in mind too of, outsiders looking in, and how, if you're meant to be focusing on something, then then there's often that belief that that's all you should be doing, and the rest of it is just like wasted opportunity to address the problem. And I can imagine, some might see it in that sense, that this is a specialist program for young men who engage in harmful sexual behaviours. But I'm so pleased to hear that, that they're so, it's a much more broader therapeutic space than that, a program and process than that.
Yeah. When we have our recruitment process, we've had to work really hard on explaining, what a therapeutic community is. They're not coming to work in an average childcare service that, and I'm sure there's plenty of excellent childcare services out there. There is. However, this is far more specialised, far more specific, and far more intense, and good outcomes, for our young people as well, and good outcomes for the, adults that are with us, learning about life and their career. And there's a lot around it as well. It's not just about the young people. So, when they come for interview, they're interviewed by young people as well. So they get to ask them a set of questions that they want to ask them. They have an interview with someone from each department, then they're invited back for a community lunch, to see if it's the right fit for them, as well.
Goodness.
So we can look at how they're kind of, managing in their interactions. It's really important. And then we'll ask the young people, what did they think about, that person that came in? Did you think they'd be a good fit for us? Would you like them to be coming in and looking after you here? And that's the same, we work closely with the education team. Care, therapy and education work really closely together. So that's the same for teachers that come in, and therapists. It's the same process for us all, So then when we come in, we spend, the induction process, we spend a lot of time talking about the expectation, and even in interview, we talk about this, the expectation for them to engage as a person. You're not, I'm always really open in interviews. You're not coming here to kind of put an intervention in with that young person without feeling something or, learning about yourself, because that won't happen at Amberleigh Care. You'll come in, and people, oh, yeah, and they'll come in. And we don't have a high turnover of staff, but we have had people that have come in and that, it'll open up something for them and they don't like it. So they've continued, it's not often, but that has happened, and that's okay, isn't it? But we do our best to prepare them for that before they can come in. And some people are really interested in that. That's what keeps them with us, and that's what they want to do. We have, people that come to us and it's not what they expected, and perhaps it's triggering something in them that they didn't know was there, or it all really different. Or some people might come into the work thinking they're going to rescue the boys and they're going to make them better people overnight, and it's all good because really different, but it's my job, along with, some others, to kind of help, people with that, really, and to manage it, and to
it's not a passive role, is it? It's not a job where you just go and you tick the boxes, and you do these things during the
yeah,
day without much thought, in a
yeah,
very routine way. I think the impression that I'm getting is that um, there are I know that there are expectations of the staff, just as there are expectations of the boys and of management, and in a therapeutic community. Um, the word that comes to me, I think, or the concept that comes to me, this particularly relates back to what you've said about your time at Amberleigh Care, but also the staff staying is one of growth. That a therapeutic communities like Amberleigh Care facilitates growth, not just for the young people, but also for the adults who are there as
yeah.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another key part of the therapeutic community. Absolutely, as much work is around the adults that work with them as that goes into the young people. There's the same amount of work, and at times, it can feel like more or less, you know. But it's really, really essential in this type of work that that's there, because we're talking about risk and things before, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But there's if we don't help, the growth and the
Mm,
containment with the adults that are working with young people, it's not going to be as influential, impactful with the young people. It's they're not going to manage themselves as well as we want them to. It's really important,
mm,
and I guess that's what's really different about therapeutic community. And there's a lot of training. There's a lot of training that we provide. As other residential organisations do. Great, but
mm,
we also
mm.
put a lot of training on around therapeutic communities, and what we're doing and why we're doing it and the purpose of it, and how are we feeling about that. So there's a lot of work around this, to help us engage in that process, ourselves.
It's a totally different concept, isn't it, really? You come to work not just to help facilitate the growth of the boys, but you come to grow yourself.
Yeah,
And through
yeah,
training, through reflective supervision groups, um, I do wonder a little bit. Well, a couple of things. It it does perhaps reflect why um, we shouldn't think that all residential childcare is the same, that it's a homogenous entity, just as families are not homogenous, and there is quite a diversity in residential childcare service provision. I do wonder, because what I know, what I'm hearing you say, and what I know, for example, from speaking to people associated with other therapeutic communities, and particularly the Cotswold community, for example, no longer around, but a lot of people have gone on to really interesting careers post the Cotswold
yeah.
community. They and cite the Cotswold community as being really instrumental in that their career growth and their growth as a person. But what's going through my mind is in more generic residential childcare, how easy or difficult do you think it is to have the same or similar kind of expectations of the staff around that you have in a therapeutic community as such?
We do have high expectations of our staff that we work, and that's good too, isn't it? But they're realistic. They're realistic, and have lots of support.
Mm,
Around that, more so than probably a lot of other residential care.
mm,
You know,
yeah.
and and people that have come into this type of work firstly have not, some have not been in residential childcare don't know any different, do they? And the kind of the more support they're getting, the kind of like wanting more and more. But in other, places, they probably wouldn't get the amount, that they are actually. There's a huge amount of support in our communities. There really is. And the expectation is to engage in that, absolutely, and everyone is different, they'll engage at different levels, and people's strengths are so different, aren't they? We've got staff that work with us that are really skilled and organised and great at organising activities for the young people, or keeping the staff organised. They're great at that. And then there's others that are not so great at that, but they're really, really lovely with the young people. Our staff are, but they're really engaging with the young people on a different level. They're very interested in that, and they're able to do it. So we do, we don't expect, I guess, exactly the same from everyone, because they're all different, and like I said, skilled in different ways, aren't they? And their strengths are different, very different personalities. We try and use them for what they're best at, kind of growing them in that way.
Yeah, I think one of the things that seems to me that differentiates different types of residential childcare provision, including the difference between general provision and a therapeutic community, is that you're not just coming to do a job where the focus is just the children. The focus there is also that focus on yourself, and it also sounds to me like you probably attract, or at least you retain, people that see the work as a real vocation. So not just a job. This is a vocation of their life. You did mention a couple of other things that I wanted to talk to you about. I'm aware of from my own circle, that there are risks and safeguards that need to be in place when we work with all young people. With Amberleigh Care, what sort of risks and safeguards are put in place to safeguard the children, the staff, and I guess the organisation as well?
So safeguarding is at the heart of everything we do. Obviously, we've got clear policies, procedures, robust routines, structured timetables, adequate staffing levels. There's, all those things that we need to have. And our young people have got individual risk assessments that are very specific from the day they arrive with us, that are very individual and specific for them. It's not blanket, rule for when young people come in, and the same risk, management for them all. It's very, very different. We work very individually with our young people, which again is really important, isn't it? And they've got, a therapist, they've got a key worker. We're all very aware of, the risks for that young people. We do that through, meetings together. Lots of communication. Communication's the key as well, communicating things, because we've got a lot of young lads that live with us, and we don't want to be getting it wrong, forgetting what young person could do and what young person can't. It's very different. And there's, we have a range of young men. We've got some young men that live with us that have, mild, if you like, harmful sexual behaviour, very different to some that have come in and might have offences, so very specific intervention and risk, that is not dictated by us sometimes, that we've got to follow, for them young men by, youth workers, police, that very different, very, very different. But of course we work with that and, do our best for young people. But it's really important that we all, are aware of each young person, and they're involved in that. We always involve our young men in, they know what we're working with the risk. It's not done, secretly around them. We do something called a board review every 3 months for that young person. So we set targets, we look at the risk, specifically, and they have every 6 months they have an aim assessment. So that specifically looks at, harmful sexual behaviour and the risks around that. So we look at where that is, whether we can reduce, some of the risks and how we're going to do that. And how that's going to look as a multidisciplinary team, how we're going to manage that, because there's no point in young people coming to us and us never helping them manage themselves when they leave. They might live with us for a couple of years. We want them to leave and be safe out in the community and be able to keep themselves safe. They can function better, they can manage themselves, they can be happy, and that's what our aim is. We want to try and reduce their risk, and some young men's risk reduces greatly, some just a bit, and they need more support, when they're 18, when they leave us. Very, very different. But there's, it's really important that the risk and safeguarding is, a massive key, with our young people, and for the adults that are coming to work with the young people, so that they're aware of it and they can, we know what's, suitable for that young man, really.
Would you say there's gender considerations, I guess, in terms of in relation to the work? Is there potential increased risk for female staff, or males needing to be the predominant carer group or worker group in the organisation?
There has been points with our young men over the years, from my experience at Amberleigh Care. There's, when we do an impact risk assessment, so it's before that young person joins us. So we're looking at what is the initial risk of them coming in? What is that risk? If the risk was sky high of them not they couldn't be around females, it wouldn't be the right environment for them, because that's, we're, very mixed, team, community, and we want to help those young men be able to work, to have relationships with different ages, different genders, of course. That's what our aim is, so we might look at, there might be a slightly higher risk of them working with a male or a female, but we manage that, when they come in, and we look at, it might be that, a male or female, perhaps, at the start when they came in, perhaps couldn't be on their own with them. So we'd have 2 adults and some more children. So it wasn't obvious, so we kind of manage it, discreetly and observe for a while, how they are and how they're interacting and how they're, because they sometimes it's environmental. They can come from an environment where the risk is very different. We're always looking at referrals of young men, and we've had young men, more recently, that have come from different environments come in, and the risk has changed quite quickly because there's a lot of routine and structure and safety around them. So the risks have eliminated, with a lot of those things, so it's dependent, so we've got to be, and we look at that regularly, very regularly. For some lads it's every day, some lads it's every week. We might look at how that looks and how we can maneuver that, really, because we want them to be able to have them relationships. But yes, we have had at points, over the years, we had a young man that kind of went towards the young females, actually, and was there were some behaviours that could have been quite frightening for some of the young females at that point. He was doing things that were, you're trying to gain some, response from them, and that happened at points, but again, that was us supporting them, young ones in manage that. There's a lot of support around that, and that young man, we still keep in touch with that young man. He's brilliant, absolutely amazing young man. But at the time, there was a need for that, and
I would say, while you've been talking, I've been reflecting on some situations from my own professional experience working in this space, and in particular, well, a couple of things. One, if we start with the what I think is a truism of this work is that connection is and a relational connection is a really strong safeguard here in relation to harmful sexual behaviours. And my observation would be that there may be a residential care home. There's a number of young people in it. Um, the young people, there may be some sexualized behavior that occurs between the young people.
Mhm.
The young people then get separated and removed from that care home. Maybe not all of them, but they get moved out, farmed out away from each other. And it's quite interesting if you think about it, because I would, from the way we've been talking about it, because you could say, well, the problem is in the children, and people do. But you could also say the problem is in the lack of connection, the lack of
Mm.
real significant relational connection they feel with adults in that
Yeah,
environment. And that's perhaps where there should be intervention rather than moving the kids out and moving them to other
yeah,
places and weakening their connections,
yeah,
as often happens in my experience. It would be better to look at, well, what are the adults not able to give them
yeah.
in those
We have a- we have
circumstances?
we have experienced that type of example quite a few times, where there's, our lads, that's happened with us, you know. But as you say, it's not about shipping them out, is it? It's about looking at, you know, the function of that, isn't it? And how we're going to
Mm,
manage that together, and that
mm,
has happened with us. And then, we haven't shipped them out, we separated them slightly for a while to manage the risk, looked at that, explored that, and then things have, moved slightly and the risk has reduced. And that has happened, and that's the reality of
mm,
this work, isn't it? And as you say, it's about looking at why that is. And we have absolutely encountered that a number of occasions,
mm, mm,
definitely, and this, it's, but like any work, isn't there? There's risks, isn't there? Like anything, we've worked with some really high end, young men that have displayed, and we really have, and and I know I talk a lot about, yeah, of course I talk about connection and loving the boys, of course, that's my main, priority. However, there's risks associated, isn't there? And we have to. It's really important that we look at that, don't we? We absolutely manage that,
mm,
and you know I've worked with people over the years, I've heard people say, that when one of our trainings that we do, we're like, can do you think we can, should we, or can we love these young people that we're working with? And I've come across people that have said, well, no, because I know what they've done. I know that what they've done, and that's their honest opinion. They felt that way, and that's the, feelings, isn't it?
mm,
But it's about us thinking past that, isn't it? And that, that's, product of, what they've been through, isn't it? And what, it absolutely is. It's, and of course there's some behaviours and instances and things they've been through that absolutely is not okay. Of course that, but it's our role to,
mm,
help them not repeat that, isn't it, in the future, and to give them, some love back. It really is, and to,
mm.
have them experience that goodness whilst they're with us, so they can have a better future. Definitely.
I've written it, and I often say that relationships are the most powerful regulating influence that we can have over the children, over anyone's
Yeah.
behavior, the relationship that you have. And I think you've mentioned in there one of the reasons why I was really keen to have you come on the podcast and talk, and you've talked about love and loving the children, and I wonder, just some before we finish up, I wonder what you would like the world to know about these boys, the boys that you have there at Amberleigh.
I, for me, it is about, like I was saying earlier on, it's, important. Well, the relationships is the key, but I think it's about being real with the young people. The relationships is the centre of everything we do. That our community is unique. It's meaningful. And we believe that everything happens through connection. That is the key. Um, we work with the most resilient young men. You just wouldn't believe. They're just, amazing young men, really, to have been through what they've been through, and they're with us and they're functioning and they're able to smile and they're able to go on activities and they're able to start to build them connections, either quickly or slowly, that's right for them, isn't it? But it's a real privilege to be able to work with, the young men that we do. Absolutely, to be part of their lives, and they, part of mine as well. Absolutely. I think, not all residential, care is right for every young person. We hear, it's not, but it's also right for a lot of young people. It really is, isn't it? And it's about them, but it's, I think as well, I would want people to think about that. It's important that we are important in engaging in that, and we're not here to do something to young people. They're not going to change by us just coming in and intervening. We've got to be on that journey with them, and we've got to be able to feel a bit of what they're feeling. We need to be on that with them. Otherwise, the impact won't be as great. And I think, I feel like I've grown as a person. I've got a lot more growing to do, of course. And one of my bosses said to me, "It's by no accident you come into this type of work." And I'm always, always, even now, what's the reason I'm in this type of work? And I know I can say, "Oh, I've had a lovely upbringing, and and that's fortunate." But there's a reason, isn't there, why I'm in this type of work, and I'm still trying to figure that out, sometimes.
I think I am too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We could. I feel like I could keep on talking to you for a while longer. I think what you said, something really, 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 really important that I wanted to just highlight there, and that is that we need to be in this work. We need to be open to feeling a bit of what they're feeling, and that means we can't have revulsion towards these young people. We have to have be able to commit to that with care and acceptance, and, as you say, love for the boys.
And if you're coming into this work thinking you're not going to feel any pain, you're wrong, because you do. You do feel pain. You feel their pain. And it's a hard feeling, but unless you can try and be open to that, it's, we need to be on it with them, not for them or at them. We're with them. That's what I would say.
Well, that's a fantastic spot to finish, Marie. Thank you very much for coming on, having this conversation.
Thank you so much.
It's not loud, but it's